Today, we're going to be talking about data. Carl, you are, and you'll have to just add whatever I miss, the Chief Data Officer of Data Valuation Partners, where you are helping major corporations, I guess, and hopefully some smaller ones as well in time, really put a dollar number on the data. That dollar number, if I've got it right so far, is about 8.1 billion that you've ascribed to assets that have been realized. But then, in addition to that, for your sins, you're also the high-level ambassador on the UN Commission, and you also chair the Impact AI and Data Committee, if that's right. So I think it's no exaggeration to say that you're leading authority in this space, and we're very lucky to have you for that conversation. Maybe I'll just check what I missed there.
No, thank you. It's all good. Pleasure to be here.
Cool, great. So yeah, I thought as a softball opening question, I would just maybe ask for people less familiar, like what is data valuation?
That's fine. Data valuation is fundamentally applying monetary value to an unrealized asset that currently sits as a consideration for intangible assets. So data itself is not allowed to be an intangible asset, but it is allowed to be valued at a point in time if you have a framework, a methodology, and a means of measurement, and it is allowed to go on your corporate balance sheet as an increase in value in your company under intangible asset notes, if again you have a means of measurement, a framework, or methodology. We solve the framework, methodology, and measurement, and have done so over 4 continents across 50 sectors.
Okay, great. And when you say it's not allowed to be an intangible asset, according to IAS 38, it's not allowed. But the truth of the economics is that, of course, it is something of value that is controlled by a company. So it is an asset, really.
That's why the 2 words considered and recognized. They're worlds apart, but as an example, the UN recognizes data as an economic asset, and it recognizes data as a new category of IP. Isle of Man recognizes data as a my head's gone, but recognizes data as a property. In China, as of the 1st of the 1st this year, data is recognized as a property and an inventory. And in fact, the Shenzhen Data Exchange, which took 2 years to put together, is actually functioning as a trading facility for trading data, literally, rather than just exchange or marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? China is also one of the leading leaders in IP finance, kind of generally. So they're definitely on the forefront of these things, which is good for them. Yeah, so it's been interesting because
so I'll just add, right now, Brazil is in the midst of changing it, and a Money 2020 company which has data as savings, literally as a savings account around data, which can be remunerated, is currently being talked about by a bunch of fintechs, as well as companies here who are looking at data pensions or ways for individuals to leverage their own data. So there's lots of things going on, and it's playing catch up in a wave that isn't just from the west to the east to the south. It's literally everywhere.
Yeah, an explosion simultaneous. So the oft-cited 90% of a company's value, which is measured on the S&P, but also in a number of other places, being intangible assets, a bunch of estimates as to what part of that 90% is data, as high as 50% I've read. But that has been a slow, long march, if you see it. And if you see that chart from the 70s, just been going up and up and up. What do you think has made it this moment that that explosion has just happened? Like, why is there an urgency for data and really other tangible valuations right now?
One, because companies value, the top 20 companies in the world have what we call a high data reliance. So literally a reliance on data to their bottom line, to their company valuation. And as such, that's taken over in terms of how you define or determine the value of a company. To put it into perspective, the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, if that were to have a data valuation for the last 70 plus years of data, and even breaking it down to since the internet's been around, you're looking in the billions in value that can release, even though it's data, then it's government data. But I'll give you another example. Within the US recently, there's been efficiencies. Obviously, that's all I'll say about that. But those efficiencies made it stopped funding for FEMA. And as such, the only asset FEMA has left is data, which they can leverage, much like Welsh Water do here, in that they're not for profits, but they grow and expand by by having bonds performed. And those bonds that are performed, again, the value of the data assets, which is unrealized, allows them to leverage that so that they're not always in debt and can leverage an asset which isn't basically taking away key components of capital.
Yeah. Okay. So it is really a confluence of a couple of different things.
Oh, so in terms of confidence, but more and more companies rely on data. As I said, companies, organizations that have a high data reliance and high data driven aspect, that is where the key changes are coming. And fundamentally, there are no indicators on Reuters, Bloomberg, PitchBook, Crunchbase, Hoover's, Barron's, which actually define how much of that reliance is. But if you take a company like Cerner, which was acquired by Oracle for 20 plus billion US dollars, they were the fourth largest electronic healthcare platform. But the platform was very ordinary. It was never about that. It was about the patient records, which could be utilized by Oracle for monetization of that from the usual external means.
Yeah. Interesting. So there's kind of a lot of hidden value or unrealized value here. What about the
Absolutely.
opposite of consequences of not knowing what you have and not kind of treating that with the reverence it probably deserves?
It's actually a confluence of all three. Companies don't need, I mean, most companies we've had educated about this didn't realize they had value there. They all realized they had data. They had no idea how to value it. Once they realized they could leverage it or collateralize it or even securitize it, it changed the game for them because they had an avenue, which means they didn't even need to be profitable. Their data was absolutely key, and you know, VCs and PEs should be taking that to account for one very good reason. When 7 out of 10 companies that are invested in go under, you literally lose all your money. But if you have an asset that you can dispose of, if you have an asset that could decrease that risk by a point, it has to be reviewed and leveraged and calculated.
It's interesting actually when we were doing the discovery very early on before we built Intanify, I had exactly that conversation with the VC that said, you know, those 7 of 10 don't necessarily die because there's no value. A lot of the time it's a moving market, it's a change in a competitor or something, and there's just all this value and it just gets flushed, which is a pity.
I'll give you a quick example of how it can be disposed of. Very, very simple example. So we all heard of Amazon, yeah? Amazon actually have a data marketplace. And there are tens of thousands of companies in different sectors on there, all selling their data. But be that API access, be that controls, be that data itself, be that data sets. To put it into perspective, we've all heard of the IMDb movie database. They actually sell their APIs on there to companies for 450,000 per year. Literally, their parental controls are 50,000 per year, and they're literally doing it on the Amazon Data Marketplace. So there is, yeah. So yeah, there are places for VCs and Ps to dispose of these. Yeah, and there are other companies which are literally selling data to the AI companies.
And we'll get to a little bit later. The first thing is to actually know what you got. So just a last thing, just to set the scene here. In terms of scale, you mentioned a couple $1 billion for that example you just gave, but just to set kind of a range for, say, scale-ups and then maybe larger companies, like how much data are we actually talking about here in terms of like hundreds or millions of dollars or billions of dollars in the kind of companies that you see?
No. So to start with, different data has different value. So us linking data ones and zeros, like your name, might have, just to put in perspective, a penny. might be the value of your name. That name tied to a medical record now jumps to 50 pounds. That tied to genome now jumps to 12,000 pounds. That's just a healthcare specific. But companies that are specializing in imaging, so satellite companies, that's that imaging data combined with textual metadata has a different value to that. High, of course, but it's leveraging. I mean, I spoke to a company yesterday that specializes as a number of satellites up there that have ability to see the gaps where fracking actually occurs to be able to point the fracking in the right direction.
Wow.
There's a Latin American company, which I can't mention for NDA reasons, but they have large deposits of gold, but they're not sure where they are. Their satellite actually is able to actually identify that, and does the same for water, and does the same for petroleum. And it's growing at a rate of knots. But highlighting, that's just value of data. But in terms of quantity of data, it doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, a company we did a data valuation for had 2,500 clients.
Yeah.
With two big companies, a bank and a wellness provider. Again, for NDA reasons, I can't mention them. But fundamentally, out of all that, with access to 20 million people, they only had 2,500 patients in there. But their platform created 5 new pathways clinically and had 85.5 million permutations on it, which meant the repository was actually providing value. You take that a step further, if they had a lot of clients, then the repository plus the consumption of data and the production of data over time and historically, that also creates value as well. It's not yet taking the Ernst & Young example when they did the NHS, great data valuation using a method called the market method, which is publicly available. But it was only for that year, and the value is 5.5 billion pounds. But the NHS has been around for many, many decades. So the historical value, which should be, when any data valuation is done, it's value of all the data and the data for that year. That should be what's looking at. And that unlocks the value of which you can make decisions.
Okay. So the NHS, a very, very lowball, incorrect valuation, we might say, is 5.5 billion for.
It was an incorrect. There's different ways to value it in terms of, if you're looking at the market value, should you consider the costs?
Yeah.
If you look at the market value, should you consider the consumption of that data?
Sure. Yeah. When I say incorrect, I mean they chose not to include a bunch of stuff that they might have. But in terms of kind of like some scale-ups or kind of mid-sized companies you've worked with, give us some examples of kind of what you found. You found I think $100 million for one company that was about to give it away. They didn't realize they have it, for example.
Yeah. So I'm just remembering about NDAs. So any company startup that's been around for a year and has been collecting data could be looking at anything from 5 to 20 times the value in data. A lot of startups that have come to us, they've at least got their invested value and more in the data that they have for the uniqueness and the accuracy of the data they've got. I mean, two companies who are doing exactly the same thing can have different data values because one's uniqueness and interoperability, and these are factors that we take into account mathematically, enables these ones to have different value.
So wait, that's useful. 5 to 25 times the invested value. So the capital raised, or the value placed on the company when it was priced.
The invested
amount. Okay.
Yeah.
So a company raises 5 million. It's probably got 25 million or more. I should say.
Yeah, I mean, the last 10 companies we've done, some of them been around for 18 months. They'll have at least 5 to 10 times their value in the data that they've got.
Yeah,
AI companies, it's all about the proprietary parameters. That's it goes off the scale on that.
Yeah.
We did a company that had been around for 8 years. They were NASDAQ listed. I won't go into what happened to them on the NASDAQ, but suffice to say that they had 20.9 trillion data points from car manufacturers. And they're valued, the data was valued at 1.5 plus billion
Yeah.
US dollars. But they needed a recapitalization, so they financed it straight off the back of the data valuation. Provided that financing, that was 8 figures.
Okay.
So again, if you're a startup, you should identify the data value immediately.
Yeah.
No, I'm not just talking about the UK or the US. In Scandinavia, they allow you to put your corporate balance sheet, intangible asset notes, value for data, SIP on your intangible asset notes. But they have a rule that if I did it today, and as in June 4th, for it to go on my balance sheet, my corporate balance sheet, I would have needed to do it last 31st of December.
Okay.
So you've got to take the rules of your accounting in place. You can't just pop it on there. But again, there's been accounting firms that have recognized what we do and reviewed what we do, both here and in the US. Again, for NDA reasons, I'm not going to mention them. But the point is, we haven't been doing this in silence. And again, back to your startups, depending on what they're doing, that unique value is there, and it's a safeguard for them. And the final thing around that is, when this conversation started to now, if you're a data company, you now have more data than you did at the start of the conversation. So although there are economic factors which the tariffs can have implications on, which were recently announced by the US, the fact is data is increasing volume, variety, and veracity.
Yeah.
And as such, with data, one of the rules from the accounting firms is that the data can be valued at a point in time again and again and again. So if I valued it 6 months ago, and we have insurers and institutions that confirm how often they want these things revalued, you're doing it 3-4 times a year.
Yeah. Okay, so that was really useful, and it reminded me of a question I was going to ask you a bit later. So just to recap, for a company, whatever money's gone in, there is a likelihood or possibility of its data being worth 5 to 25 times what had been invested. And you have a case study of a company whose valuation increased 56x. So I guess that ties to your number, from 15 million to 852 million. I think that's a case study of yours. Could you talk that through and just talk about, where the 15 started, and how it actually got to 852?
No, that's fine. So this is an interesting play. So this company literally, and still does, goes around the world buying up exclusive rights to third world countries, manual or electronic healthcare records. And then they digitize them if they're manual. And what they do is they sell those records, anonymized, of course, depending on the different countries' GDPR and DPA and PII and HIPAA agreements. And they sell them in the US because there is a lack of ethnicity in medical records.
Yeah.
And by having large data sets, it solves a problem within the US medical system and for that matter, in the insurance sector as well. So the reason why was it 852 million? Well, interestingly, it was only for 400,000 cardiovascular patients of a particular hospital in Kuala Lumpur. The interesting bit is how, if it's 852 million and I have 400,000 people that this is for, that's really expensive medical records. It was never about just those 400,000 people for that point in time. What it was about was the 400,000 people and their cardiovascular medical records and the 17 years of historical data. It was also about 5.8 million historic episodic records for those patients. It was also about the 58.2 million treatment records for those patients. And it was also about the 38.6 million prescription records for those 400,000 patients. Now, with respect to data and the monetization, it can be monetized infinitely. You can sell the same data to different companies at different prices. And as such, for large pharma, having those treatment and prescription records historically as well, that's like gold dust, especially when in that particular country, from the hospital pharmacy to the pharmacy outside the hospital, there's a 4,000% markup in terms of those for an aspirin, as an example. So that's why it had an $852 million valuation.
Okay. And that valuation was kind of realized through a sale, or was your nominal valuation on the balance sheet was a recapitalization, or?
That's good. So that data valuation was utilized by an investing party that gave that company $60 million in investment, plus took a 20% buyout option on top of that. But it was all off the back of the data valuation stuff. So that's what we call a collateralization of the data.
Okay. Brilliant. And do you know what so that implies a certain valuation? They had an uptick as a result of the data valuation that you had carried out, which was
absolutely for that company. That was just Kuala Lumpur. I know for a fact that they have. I won't say, but let's just say they have other Latin American countries and Southeast Asian countries data as well now. So their value would be skyrocketing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Very good. So you have this very helpful image of what a company understands about its data and what the value actually is of kind of an iceberg, where you say about 5% is understood through dashboards and other, and really 95% is where the value is. Perhaps you could just talk about that a little bit more and what makes up that and why the rest of it's missed.
No, that's absolutely fine. So to talk about the iceberg, you have to talk about two rules that Ernst & Young, Deloitte, PwC, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and the United Nations all abide by the respective criteria for data valuations. So this iceberg you're referring to basically illustrates that most companies are very aware of the term external monetization, and they monetize via analytics, behavioral trends, visualizations, dashboards, etc. But that data is the visible data. The hidden data underneath, all of the data and resources and APIs and links and third-party data which went to create that visible data, that represents between 90 and 95% of a company's data. And I'm not even including the unstructured data, of which there's always an enormous amount. Now, the reason behind this iceberg is that any data, if it's going to have value, has to have a probable future economic impact. So if the visible data, your analytics, etc., is generating revenue, and that's 5 to 10% of all your data, the 90% must have value because it's what's actually creating that data. And that's the gap. That's what's unrealized. That's what you're valuing.
Yeah.
But with all of the data underneath, the hidden data, the second criteria is data ownership. Now, data must be owned, but ownership is a many splendid thing. The data can be owned outright. It could be licensed. It could be via rights. But my favorite being is if you transform or improve data you get from another resource, it is yours. And as such, these little idiosyncrasies go a long way. Again, taking the medical, the life sciences and healthcare space, you may have millions upon millions of healthcare records, but you may only have 5% ownership. Because the rules around it, like the NHS X is where is a large area where companies exert their ability to buy data, but again, it's anonymized and different ologies around that. But then that changes when it's anonymized. And again, anonymized data, your name, my address, my telephone number, over and above those generic points, you can still get very, very precise, even without that information from anonymized data sets.
Yeah, yeah. Cool, very useful. There's a company that we have a published case study on that's I'd love to chat with you about after this. So when you've written pieces about kind of communicating to CFOs and helping CFOs manage their resources, without getting too much into technical conversation, because it's probably more interesting for you and I and CFOs than kind of everybody. But what are the kind of the key metrics or the language that you found that really gets through to executives when you're talking about this stuff?
Absolutely fine. So CEOs, CDOs, chief revenue officers, chief information or investment officers, all good. CFOs, my advice and experience is treat them well, because for a CFO, part of, depending on what size the company is, CFO, part of their responsibility is to attract investment. And once a CEO knows that this unrealized asset that can leverage, the first question they ask is, why haven't you found this? Why am I hiring you if you can't do this? So it's a fine line in that CFO is that, we educate CFOs in a way to ensure that they understand what it is, how it can be leveraged, whilst not embarrassing them, because
Yeah.
they are a gateway, but B, they sign off on this, and as such, because although this has been around for 20 years, it hasn't, there's many theses on this, etc. It's come to the fore in terms of how it all works in conjunction, in unison with each other. And as such, delivering that, highlighting that makes it very clear from a CFO's perspective that they can take this as an opportunity as opposed to an embarrassment.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That is a very sensitive line. Cool. Right. What else? So, for a company that's wanting to, so let's say a CFO or founder of a company that is kind of listening to this, realizing that there is, maybe a very substantial amount of hidden value there. Obviously at some point it might make sense to call you, but I'm sure there are simple things that one could do kind of, in-house first, just take the first steps. Like what advice would you actually give a company to dip their toe in the water?
Yeah, the first step would be to look at a number of criteria to determine data reliance to their bottom line or to their company valuation. Now, people may think, oh, how do I do that? There's nothing there. Actually, there is. The profit and loss actually tells them more than they think. So, number one, what are you spending on R&D? There's going to be a data element there.
Yeah.
What are you spending on analysts who are very data specific? And this, by the way, that ties back to UN edict about how data can now be included as part of GDPR, but it also needs to understand what the labor costs of that are. So how much you're spending? Are you spending more on analysts than you are in data generation? Do I need a CDO to find this? Short answer, if I don't know, well, who do I need to hire to work this out? That's a nice sidebar. But on top of that, it is working, how much do my analytics contribute to my bottom line? And then over and above that is, okay, I'm generating trends, I'm generating reports, I'm generating insights, I'm generating information that I'm leveraging. So we're working out in what I'm selling, which generate my cost of sales, which generate my sales. Is that coming from data alone?
Yeah.
That's quite an easy percentage to work out. Now, the combination of that being the third point I just made, minus the labor costs, plus the R&D with respect to data, gives you a ballpark figure very quickly.
Okay.
But over and above that, very, very simple way is, if your company is worth £10 million, ask yourself this question. If I had a irrevocable loss of data today, and when I say irrevocable, I mean it's gone. You have got no backups. You've got no client list. Everything you had in order to function as a business from a data perspective is gone. Ask yourself what percentage of your company would be left.
Yeah.
That will tell you exactly how reliant on data you are.
Yeah.
And then the scary bit is how long have I been collecting data? And if it's like 5, 10 years, that gives you a ballpark value that you need to action on.
That's interesting. It's one of the questions we deliver in our product in the high level discovery is to ask exactly that, which is if you did lose this particular asset, would it be a problem? How much would you spend to kind of get it back? It would be the end of the business, and depending where you're on that spectrum, it tells you kind of what there is to be kind of looking for there. Cool. So that's very useful. So if I can play that back, looking at exactly the linkages between the data that you have that you generate and the way that you make money, and to the extent you have, for example, more R&D, or more people doing analytical work or analytics tied to the way you're making money, the higher the propensity for data giving value to your business. Did that get it right?
That's potentially one way.
Yeah.
The R&D is a function of what you do, and I'm sure we're all aware in the industry that on R&D rebates, there's a creative magic to it in what you do. But the R&D is there in order to determine what my direction of technology is, what my context is around that, and how I'm going to use that to capture revenue. So it is a function. There is a function of that involved.
Yeah.
But obviously, you're already a business. R&D happens at the start of your business, and it happens every year in order to expand, improve, and adapt. So that's why I mentioned the three areas to think about, as opposed to just focusing on R&D expenditure.
Yeah. And I like the with and the without method, because that's very simple, right? If the answer is wrong to that question, then you've got a lot of value. So cool. So maybe just as we wrap up, I think you quoted in something you wrote as saying that in 5 years, companies won't ask if they should value their data. They should ask why they didn't do it sooner. What do you think 5 years back from 5 years forward, right now, what's holding companies back from doing that, and why might it change?
5 years from now, I'm almost certain there's going to be active trading of data globally. And this is not just me saying it, this is from different very large institutions that are monitoring what's going on in this marketplace already. This combined with the fact that individuals' data from a millennial's perspective, hence why I mentioned Brazil earlier, literally there are bank accounts being created as data is your primary revenue generator for individuals. From the moment where you're walking through the park and you buy an ice cream, it's going to be the temperature of the ice cream, the billing, the transaction, the tire air pressure, etc. And there are unique positions available to capture that market. That market is needed because it needs to feed into what's going on with AI and AI agents, etc. Don't know if there'll be AGI robots roaming around, but the fact remains that from what I'm hearing, the digital twinning of individuals would be a function of that AI, and as such, it's a cyclical effect or cyclone effect. As companies gather data now and realize its value, they're going to realize more and more value of what's coming from other resources in order to increase the values of those companies. And KPIs will definitely be around, and there'll be standardized KPIs either through the through the ODI or the EDM or at a country by country level. Right now, it's not the Wild West at all. It's way past that, but it is a function of best practices now. As time goes on in 5 years, there'll be a lot more regulation around data, its usefulness, how it's used. I think also digital assets, which this morning there was an announcement about a GBP, a sterling coin, sterling stable coin, which is potentially linked to what the Bank of England is doing. That's all data. There's nothing about it that is not data. And is the value 1 GBP stablecoin is a pound, or is it actually a pound and a penny, because the penny
Mm.
is the function of the data.
Mm.
And this is where we actually have different digital asset companies who are leveraging the value of their data in order to expand and acquire.
Mm.
And digital assets from start to finish is nothing more than data and economics combined.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason companies might be held back right now is because many of these things are yet to transpire, and it's probably only people at the leading edge like yourself that are looking over that and saying, well, this is what the future is going to look like. And as companies see that more clearly, they will probably start to realize that they should be doing it.
Thank you, and that's very kind. But it's also companies such as yourself who are specializing in your areas that uh, enable people like me to do interviews such as this to expand the word that's out there. There are a lot of people and there are a lot of businesses, and there are a few gaps. When those gaps happen, companies such as ourselves need to shout loud and proud.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So maybe the final thing to leave people with is we'll be working closely. So certainly, if using Intanify, you are identifying valuable data assets, we will put users in touch with you to take next steps if they want to. Otherwise, if they want to work with you, how should they reach out to work with you? And I know you have a complementary product as well to dip the toe in.
Absolutely. So if you want to contact us, info@datavaluationpartners.com. Our website is datavaluationpartners.com. And in order to determine what could be your range, we can actually go into our website, enter the questions that are there. It's very clearly called assumptive data valuation, and that will give you a ballpark range to start the conversation on what your data for your business in your sector could be worth.
Cool. Well, with that, I'll thank you very much, Carl. And I know you've got a busy day and are on the plane soon. So thanks very much for taking the time. And we look forward to keeping on talking.
Pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Dylan.
Cool. Cheers, Carl.